So one of the main goals of this conference is, yes, to empower students with technical knowledge. But as I mentioned earlier, we also really want to focus on ways that we can recognize and improve diversity in the tech space. So really excited now to have a panel with some very good friends, super successful individuals, and we are going to just have a informal discussion about all sorts of interesting topics around diversity and whatnot. So first, let's just kind of do a brief introduction, who you are, what you do, and something you're passionate about.
Sure. So, hey, everyone.
Test.
Hello. There we go. Hey, hi, I'm KT, Sagona Stoffel. I am the Chief Information Security Officer of Built Rewards, which is a loyalty rewards point program. We have about 500,000 credit card users, and we focus on rent day. So we give you points based off of rent. Yeah, so like a Chase Freedom kind of credit card. You've probably seen our marketing, at least in airlines at some point. I am their first CISO because they are still technically a startup. And right now my friends are working on an AR game called Fruit Punch, and I'm designing the 3D backgrounds behind it. So it's a Don Hertzfeldt art style. So think stick figures, but they're going to be like fighting each other.
Cool. Love it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Laura Peaslee. I'm the Director of Data Engineering here at Conji. I work here. And in a past life, I had a defense contracting company doing contracts with NSA and Cyber Command. So I got to work in a whole different space in security. So it's been wild and awesome. Also helped Devin build EDR back in the early days. So great experience there. I'm passionate about, I have chickens. I'd love to get goats. I live on an island. Yeah. So, living the side hustle dream of also being a farmer. So.
That's amazing. I'm Megan Valentine. I'm a software engineer at Google. I work on AI for Gmail. I also started a startup that does financial inclusion called Walkthrough. And I love making art and just like enjoying the small, great things of life.
Thank you, y'all. Super interesting. So we're going to start with maybe some more personal questions. And the first one, and these are largely from the panelists themselves, is, if you could talk about some of the career choices that you would encourage the audience, especially some of the students, maybe decisions that you made that, in retrospect were like, wow, that was a great decision. And then also on the flip side, if there's anything you were like, maybe I could have done that better, or maybe if you saw other decisions that you would, not recommend, perhaps people making. So
okay,
thoughts on that?
I'll go first. So before I started my defense contracting company, I worked for a different contracting company and got to know the CEO really well. And at one point, it's a pretty flat organization. I was like, I want to be in management. I'm going to go be a manager. And I had a really heartfelt conversation with him. He was a really great mentor. And he said, why do you want to be a manager? I'm like, well, I think one day I want to start my own company. And he's like, well, why don't you just do that? And I said, what? What do you mean? Why don't you just do that? And he's like, yeah, I'll give you a list of how to get your company cleared to do defense work and give you a whole list of something to do. It's up to you to do it, but do it, work for me while you do it, and then transition. And that's exactly what I did. And it was wonderful because I don't even think that occurred to me. He had faith in me that I could do it. And he also connected me with other female owners in the space. So I feel like I was set up for success. So one mentor can just completely change your mentality about the ways you did things. And I'm so happy that I did things when I was really early on. And ultimately that's not where my career went. I didn't stick with government contracting for 10 years like most people do. But it totally was a catalyst for just changing my entire mentality. So that.
So I had a different story in mind, but yours is so inspiring that you reminded me of something that happened to me, I think, a year and a half ago. So I was a threat hunter, cyber threat intelligence, forensicator back in the day. And I was never in a management position, at least from a vocational ability. I ran the Manhattan Young Democrats and did some other minor leadership things there here and there. But I was talking with a company that we all know of that shall not be named, and I was interviewing with them for an individual contributor base level conversation. And he made a statement that struck with me today. And he said, what are your career goals? And I said, maybe in the future, company development. And he just said, well, and he kept referring to me as like a god of the game. And he referred to that as in I was just so technically strong, but I was still just in an individual contributor role. And he said to me, well, I figured if you wanted to be in management, you would have just done it by now. And similarly, I didn't think that I just had to go do it. And then now I'm a CISO, right? So just kind of acknowledging that truth, or, just going for it anyways. Back to the political side, it apparently takes female identifying humans 7 times more encouragement than a man in order to run for a political office. It takes 7 more people for a female to feel like they are comfortable putting themselves in an electoral position. So I would really just recommend just going and doing the thing, despite and not necessarily even needing that extra encouragement that you might realize.
Yeah, I am so inspired by both of your stories. Those are beautiful. I am going to give slightly different advice. I went straight from college into working at Google for 5 years, and then I quit to start a startup. And I actually really liked that trajectory because I think I'm a little bit of a risk averse person, which is maybe like I need 7 more people encouraging me to do a thing. But I think that working at a big tech company can be like a really good move financially, which sounds very simple, but it's nice to like have a little bit of cushion to put you in a place where you can take risks without like fear for your own sort of like survival things. And so I really recommend that as like a career path, like get a little nest egg and then like take leaps from there and be really bold with it.
Awesome. Great advice and very inspiring. So kind of along the same lines, you mentioned that, in some senses, people had to point out suggestions for you that maybe weren't immediately clear to you. And so, one of the questions that one of the panelists posed is, have you experienced imposter syndrome, and what are your strategies dealing with that? And I think this is a great question because I think that impacts seemingly everyone in tech, right? I've talked to like some of the most talented researchers who I look up to, and when they mention that even they struggle with imposter syndrome, it like shocks me because I wouldn't suspect that. So in a way, it's great to know that something that lots of people struggle with. But on the flip side, I'd be really interested in, if that's something that you've struggled with, and if so, what were the strategies that you found effective, both maybe as an individual or if other people, the support thing you mentioned, like how do we kind of recognize, address that and work through? Because it seems like that's something that's maybe holding a lot of people back where otherwise they could, just crush it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that affects everyone. I've also talked to super, super successful people who still feel this way. And so, yeah, it's definitely across the board an issue. For myself, I've definitely experienced it. There are just moments where you're like, I don't think I know enough to like apply for this job, or like, I think I would need to feel much more confident to like do this thing. And for myself, I've taken a lot of solace in kind of like switching the frame towards like a learning and growth mindset where like I don't have to, I can trust that I'm really good at learning new things and new situations and can go on to a new team, into a new project, into a new field and like grok what's happening because I like am not scared of the uncertainty and the ambiguity and like looking into it and figuring things out. And I think that that's just a really good strategy in tech overall because we're in this field that's changing so much. Like there's new technology all the time, and it's really nice to trust that you can learn things. And so for myself, I try and remind myself when I apply for jobs or things like that, that like that is the core skill, and you can like succeed in many different sectors using that.
Absolutely. And I also feel like people who have imposter syndrome don't put enough stock in the things that they're great at. Like you're always looking at the thing that you're worst at, but looking at the best person at the thing that you're worst at. And when you do that, you kind of like don't take into account your own personal strengths. So I feel like knowing what you're good at kind of gives you that confidence to kind of push through the things you don't. And just knowing that no one is great at everything at all. It's just not something you can possibly do. Unless you devote your entire life to it. And I don't recommend that. So balance is lovely.
Yeah. I'm so over the term imposter syndrome. For me, it's more like Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like everyone feels imposter syndrome and consider it a compliment if you feel it, because maybe, so Dunning-Kruger is the idea that people who are slightly above average intelligence feel like they are slightly below average intelligence. And then the inverse is also true, right? So yeah, right. And I'm sure I fit on that other side of the spectrum on various occasions too. I think personally in my own career, I needed the confidence in my own work to validate my existence in this space. And so knowing that me, who I am, with the lack of knowledge that I have, is also okay, I needed that help from the people around me. That is not a simple level of confidence that every human can have. So what I try to do now is make sure that the people around me can feel that their lack of knowledge, whether or not that's true, is also acceptable, because just who they are as a human is acceptable too. And I think that helps just dissipate the concept, or maybe not, who knows?
No, I like that, because it's something we think about that we're individually struggling with, and recognizing that, hey, probably our coworkers and colleagues are in a similar situation, and how do we help them through that. And Laura, I really like that you mentioned it's kind of a comparison thing, or knowing that not everybody knows everything. I kind of have a story that's related to that, where it's not directly related to the career, but I learned to surf as an adult, and I learned in Hawaii, which I wouldn't recommend, because everyone there is insanely good. Like, they're born carrying surfboards. And, it was frustrating for me because I would continually compare myself to the surfers who were better than me. And there was this spot I always wanted to surf. And I noticed once I surfed at that spot, which was a huge accomplishment, I didn't recognize that accomplishment. I immediately started then looking at the surfers who were at that higher level spot, who were even better, and continually just compared up. And then one day I really stopped, and I was like, because I had this imposter syndrome, like, I shouldn't even be there, and really frustrated. And I said, this is somewhere where I really wanted to be. And so if I compared where I had come from, it really then helped me feel better about that. So I think it's important for all of us in our careers too, where, as we increase, as we start giving conference talks or releasing tools or getting more competent, we're now going to just keep comparing up. And it's really important to be like, take a moment and say, wow, like, where I was 5 years ago, that individual would be very, very proud of me. And so that's something I felt really, that's helped me with, feeling the imposter syndrome and kind of the insecurities. So kind of along the same lines, right? I think one of the challenges of the imposter syndrome is, maybe if you work in an organization that's not recognizing you per se. And so one of the questions was, what strategies, especially for underrepresented folks in tech, can make use to make sure their work gets recognized? And I think there's a lot of studies showing, for example, in the gender pay gap, women especially often aren't recognized as much for their work. And there's some inherent bias or systemic issues there. And that's obviously super unfortunate. So, just if you could talk to that, and maybe what are some actions you could take as individuals, but also that maybe your colleagues or your management are like, how do we address that? And so that people who are, doing amazing work are adequately recognized in whatever way that is. Say what's on your mind, Katie.
Oh man.
Don't hold back.
Oh man. I don't think it's your job. I don't think it's the individual's job. I think it's the manager's job.
Yeah.
I'm the wrong person to ask this sometimes, because I've gone through some of these trainings, and there sometimes are emotional responses of, okay, like, how do you feel when you have to show off your work? And then everyone sits in a room and you say, like, emotionally, how you feel when you have to talk about your work. And I was one of like 50 people in the room that expressed anger as my primary emotion. And that was because, for me, I feel like other people, if you're on a team, should be working with you, right? And so, and I hope I'm not a hypocrite in this, that I try really hard that if I have team members that are doing cool work, I do try to like look for awards to see if they are, noteworthy, or praising them in the space, sending that extra email to say thank you, being overly communicative and positive wherever I can be. I really think finding the right people, or finding the humans in the organization that you work at that can lift you up in that way. And conversely, just being that human, even if you are like as new as you are with imposter syndrome, and and you're just like, you feel like you're tiny and you're down here. I genuinely feel like every single individual human has so much power that they don't realize, right? So use that power, and then help other people, and then find those communities of positive humans that will, help lift you up together. That's my thought.
Love it.
I love that too. That's great. It's a constant struggle, definitely. Like, for example, going into a project, you feel like pumped, this is great, it's going to be awesome. And then maybe toward the end of it, you get kind of burnt out. And then, like, say a product gets released and you see how much money it's bringing in, and you're like, wow, this was a really big success. But for some reason, it doesn't feel like it's me, like I'm disconnected from this at this point. And so I even had this recently, like, taking stock of that, having managers that bring you back to that point, like, look at what you've accomplished. Like, we kind of suffer from like thinking about the now and the next thing, but you need to stop and think about the past and think about where you've come from, what you've done. And then having a team that's encouraging and taking time to celebrate is super, super important. Otherwise, you just kind of get blinders on, you move on to the next thing and you don't feel that payoff. And a lot of developers are like that. They're just looking for the next thing. They're working on the next, they get burnt out. It turns into this negative cycle. So just getting ahead of that. And yeah, awards are great. Celebrating, like, lots of Slack emojis, lots of excitement for when people, even just like big steps they've taken or things that they've done. Like, the more you can like put praise toward that and encourage a team to do the same, I feel like they feel more valued. So.
Yeah, I really love both of those suggestions. It's so fun. I feel like I'm learning from both of you on this panel also as we're talking, so thank you. So at Google, there's this amazing engineering director named Mecca who talks about this a lot. And so it's a piece of advice I like to share with people. And basically, there's this issue where if you're an underrepresented minority in tech, sometimes people have this bias about you that you're just like not a good engineer, even though like obviously how you look has like nothing to do with whether you're a good engineer or not. And so there will be this thing that happens where you work on a really impactful, complex project, and then afterwards they will like retroactively devalue what you did and are like, oh, like that wasn't that hard, or like that kind of thing, because it fits in with this sort of subconscious impression of like your ability. And so to protect against this, and this is a tool that everyone can use, not just underrepresented folks, Mecca really suggests looking for an anchor person who is basically someone within your organization, maybe your manager, but maybe just someone else in your organization who's really technically reputable and like who has organizational, like institutional power in some way. And if you talk with them about your project before you start on it, and you like align with them on like how complex it is and how impactful it's going to be, and then along the, like, as you go through the project, if you keep them updated about like all of the issues you run into and all of the things that you do, they'll be like, one, very helpful in that process, and you'll probably like do better work for talking with someone about it. But also by the end of the project, they'll be super invested in your work. And from the beginning, they said it was complex and that it was impactful. And so they'll actually usually, without even you having to ask them to do it, like tell the other people who are starting to devalue your work, like, hey, no, actually, this was really impressive. And so it's this kind of interesting hack that I think can really protect against, like retroactive devaluing. And if your manager isn't going to be that person for you, like make sure to find someone else who will be.
It's like taking someone along with a journey with you. I love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I like that, it's kind of a very actionable thing that, you mentioned some of those systemic biases, and even some of them are unconscious. So this next question kind of works off that, because I think there's many people in tech who realize the challenges of diversity, understand the gender pay gap, but I still think there are things, and I'm going to direct this towards myself, like me as a moderator, what are some things that maybe you struggle with day to day, or, you see that are consistent that, me as a white male might not recognize, or just, kind of me take for granted. Like the analogy is often, like guys walking down a street at night, we like just don't think twice about that. And then, it's like, well, women often really struggle with this, or validly concerned about that. And for a lot of guys, it's like, that's a shocking realization. And so I think, any examples you can think of that can just, spread awareness, or, express some of the challenges you face, and then maybe some recommendations for those would be good. Because I think some of the challenges people don't necessarily realize, some of the challenges you're working through.
I feel like I'm going in order. So I'm trying to like change it up.
Okay. All right. Now I'm on the spot. Definitely, there have been challenges along the way, just things you don't really think about. I remember early on working in a tech company, and the business development guy would come by, oh, we have a new contract, and can I talk to the guys? And the guys were everyone but me, and so they'd all go in a conference room and give their level of effort. And then meanwhile, maybe the customer wasn't going to pay that much, and it would turn into my project. I'm like, oh, so I wasn't included in the room to estimate this, but now I have to live up to these people's estimates. So. That was not lovely. But the way I got around that is I just mentioned it to my team members and they didn't see it. But then like once other people see it, they kind of buy in like, oh yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And then I already had a relationship with my team. So then they kind of brought it up like, oh no, she needs to be part of this too. And so having great allies kind of pushes through awkward times like that where people are doing things maybe even without realizing it that do feel exclusive. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it's like we all have really different experiences. Like everyone's so different. So I can really only speak to my own, but I don't know. It's always a mystery a little bit as to like what someone else's experience is like. I think that there have been moments where like I've just been talked over in meetings, or like I'll say an idea and then someone else will say the idea like 10 minutes later, and then everybody's like, wow, great idea, great idea. And so like that, it just
Rude.
happens, and it's sort of funny when it happens because you're like, wait, really? Like, is this the movie we're living in? But it's definitely real, and I think what I try and do in those moments now, like I haven't done this my whole career, is just like call it out really gently and be like, hey, like I don't think that sounded the way you thought you were trying to sound, or things like that, where you kind of like assume that the other person isn't ill-intentioned and just like said something a little bit wrong, or like didn't mean to talk over you or to talk over someone else. And I think just like gently being like, hey, I think my coworker Lynn had something more to say there, can actually just like really open up space for someone to finish saying what they're saying, which sounds so simple, but can have a big impact when you add them all together.
This is awful. And I sometimes will intentionally interrupt people and then apologize ahead of time to set the standard for like interrupting is not welcome here. So I'll do it first, and then I will say, I'm sorry for interrupting. And then that sets the stage. It's really aggressive, but the amount of times I've been interrupted or talked over, it just gets to the point that I will assert dominance, which is awful. I don't recommend doing that. Just be a nice person, please. There's so many things. And also I guess I should call out, like, thank you for calling out like white male, what things you might not understand. We are all, 3 white facing women here too. So like, if we're talking about diversity, like this just needs to be called out, right? Like we're coming from a very specific perspective. And I'm sure you all have very specific perspectives here. What not to understand, or like what's hard to convey, is kind of the day-to-day background that I have to constantly think about. Are these decisions being made strategically because of who I am? Are these have these decisions been made because of what I look like or who I stand and represent? That's constant. That hasn't ended in every corporation I've worked in. There's only every HR document that exists that revolves around me, of which there are not many, but like in terms of just the level of depth that I have to think through just to question my existence in the space. And it's just an undercurrent that constantly exists. And if you don't have that thought, that's great. I'm jealous of that. But that's something I have to think about constantly.
Sounds kind of draining in a way. Is there just, taking up space that, like you said, could be focused on something else, which, yeah.
That's a this is water question, right?
Frustrating. I think a lot of you have touched on some of the challenges and how teams or managements should be and can be very important in helping address some of these challenges. So the next question is, maybe what are some of the either initiatives or programs you've seen implemented at the company level or even the management level that you've seen bear fruit? We have a lot of students here, but we also have people in industry, and so I think students going in, if they see programs at work that they can gravitate towards. And then the flip side, there's a lot of talk about this, and I think there's often good intentions, but maybe what are some, in your opinion, programs that maybe kind of miss the mark? So like, what can management do? What should companies do that, if you're a potential student employee, like, oh, this is great that they're doing, and versus maybe some that are slightly misguided, even if they're well intentioned.
I feel like the mic always ends here, so I'm starting with everything and just trying to break it up. I really met some cool people through the Women's Executive Forum. They're a little corporate-y, but they're almost at every large tech conference. So if I, am looking for a pipeline of humans I want to hire, if I just would like to go talk to a place that I know is very dedicated to that, I would say the Women's Economic Forum has actually been really, really helpful.
Very good. Also, hiring practices are super important. I think we do a good job at Kanji. Just having a diverse applicant pool by like looking specifically in places for underrepresented people. And then once you have a pool, going through that, interviewing, and having a very consistent way of interviewing. I find that we have like extrovert bias, right? The more someone talks, the more confident we think are, oh, you know what you're doing. But then, more introverted maybe are overlooked. So having a rubric for what you're looking for, having consistent questions every single time. Because sometimes the interviewers, we have a tendency to kind of just go on a whim and start asking wild questions here and there, and kind of letting the person you're interviewing lead in a way. Because they're then driving the conversation and not so much the person interviewing. So I feel like that way you can make it a lot more fair. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with hiring, you can definitely, I think one of the things that's worked really well for Google is giving people the rubric that they're going to be graded on ahead of time and like training material to study for the interviews. And so I think that that can really even the playing field. Like Stanford has a class about like how to pass the Google interview. And Stanford students do really, really well in Google interviews. And so if you just like give that curriculum to everyone else, like turns out that they do well in Google interviews too. And so there's some like opportunity is not even across the world. And so figuring out how to even it out in the ways you can when you're hiring and interviewing, I think makes a ton of sense because you're going to get, you will get higher quality by doing that because you're going to be hiring the best people. I want to say great things about the AWS Impact Accelerator for Women Founders. I was part of that when I was founding my company, and they did just an amazing job pulling in a really diverse group of cool, awesome women founders, which was just so fun to be a part of because most of the other rooms I was in as a founder were male dominated and mostly white. And it was just really empowering to be around people who were really different than that and just see how they were thinking about the space and all of that. So I found that really impactful.
Perfect. This next question, I know Megan, you could probably talk to this, and I'm sure you can as well, Katie and Laura. So as I mentioned, we have students here, and you mentioned talking about starting your own company, and part of that usually involves talking to VCs. I know that's an area where being a woman traditionally has been very challenging. And so I know, for example, Megan, you've had experience, where you going in and pitch. And so I'd love to hear some of your experience, some of the challenges and maybe some of the solutions you found, because I think landing a good VC can be essential to a startup succeeding. And so any advice you would have for students or anyone in that, especially in terms of the challenges that you faced as a woman founder, I think would be super interesting and helpful.
Yeah, this is a tough one because I don't know that I have solutions. I just have problems for you.
Identifying the problem is a good step one, but maybe.
So my co-founder Ben and I both sent out emails to venture capitalists. We sent probably 100 emails each. And Ben got back a ton of responses and I got back a couple.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
And they were the exact same email, same subject line, only our names were different. And so there was just this moment of oh, this is why. Wow. And so I had been doing a fair bit of the fundraising at first, and eventually we were never mind, put Ben in the mix, because honestly, we were I guess this is the game we're playing. And I, had a male co-founder and could do that. We still didn't raise money, so I don't know if that was the right path there. But I think it's a really hard space, and you want to find someone who's gonna be on your team and go to bat for you and like sponsor you in some way and like find those opportunities for you. And so yeah, I wasn't able to find someone who would do that, and it was a bummer, but also I don't know, I had a great time founding a startup. I highly recommend it. So
Push through.
no solutions.
Yeah.
I never had to deal with VCs because I did government contracting, but I feel like it's a similar vein of like networking and meeting at the companies. And a lot of it is like teaming on contracts with other companies and other founders that you agree with. And so a lot of it is meeting with people, interviewing with them, feeling if you get a good gut feeling about someone. Because, you know, it's a very vulnerable thing. Like if they don't pick you or they ditch you last minute, then you're out of a contract. So just really finding the right people to work with is key. And then once I found those people, we'd like work on the next proposal together and the next proposal together. But I do feel like it is hard. And there definitely were times where I was getting business cards from people and it was mostly just they want to have a date, not talk about business. So yeah, vetting the right people is important.
That sucks. I'm so sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
That's awful. That's lame. I guess I work for a startup now, and so we were valued pretty high. So I guess I'm not ever going to have that problem.
Great.
That's a lie. That's a lie. That's a lie. Going VC is a really good boot camp for startups. So if anyone here is actually interested in venture capitalism or getting into VC space, going VC is actually it's a really solid 16-week educational program. Yeah, I feel like aligning with investment theses is also something that not everyone does. Everyone's trying to be, and I have no idea. I'm looking at you because I don't know whether this is accurate in your case or not, but aligning with the venture capitalist fund or the fund's actual investment thesis and making sure that you're hitting them right at how much money they have, like within that certain 10-year time frame for that they usually exist, I think is really important too. So.
And what do you think the VCs can do? Because like I loved your experiment essentially, where it was same email, same subject line, and I think it really, I mean, that's an eye-opening story to me because it just clearly shows this bias. And so like, I know you said there was no solutions, but what would be just like some recommendations? Because that sucks. So like, you know, our VCs just, you know, and maybe this also relates to hiring practices where I've heard things where like the name of the candidate is like removed essentially because people have innate or subconscious biases towards minority names or women names. And so it's like, are there suggestions or like, how do we maybe even think about addressing this?
I do think that I think there's been a fair bit of research. I can't point it out. So this is like an 80% fact that like just letting people know about their biases actually really helps them adjust for that. So like in code reviews, like everyone actually will leave more comments for women on their code than for men. But if you tell people that like, hey, this is a thing that happens across the board, like they'll sort of like self-check and like start doing better at it. And so I think we often get like diversity panels for like people working in tech, and it's like, how can you like do what you can to survive in this system? But I think that like we should be having panels for the VCs, and they should be like, doing workshops and learning about it. And I think it could help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great advice. Any other thoughts from you two? I mean, like you mentioned, Laura, the hiring practice too. A common theme that I think you've all pointed out, which is really interesting, is you know, finding you know, you mentioned the anchor individual or a mentor. You know, for students who are just getting into this or individuals who work at companies, do you have any thoughts or recommendations on, you know, how to seek out a mentor, or if that's and also maybe what steps, like if you're in a company, like can you set up a mentoring program for, you know, incoming students, or it just seems mentors are super valuable. And so I would love some thoughts and recommendations about, you know, like I said, how to pick a good mentor or how companies can maybe make that an offering so it's easier for people to seek out.
Yeah, I think that you should look for a sponsor instead of a mentor, which is just like a slight definition difference, but like someone who will like find you big opportunities and like help you get them. And then sort of just like advocate you and advocate for you and like shine a light in some ways on what you're doing. And I think that that can be really helpful. And mentorship is amazing too, but I think that there's a little bit you like get a little bit more oomph with someone who's willing to go to bat
Sure.
for you.
Yeah. No, that's great advice.
Absolutely. I do mentorship, but it's more informal. And I kind of wish that now that you're talking about it, we should make it more formal because it
Yeah.
actually has been super helpful. And sometimes when like the people I'm mentoring aren't comfortable going up their management chain, like for example, recently there was a more junior engineer who was worried about, you know, complaining too much because, you know, she overheard like junior engineers bring problems, but senior engineers bring solutions. And I'm like, don't wait till you've solved every problem for yourself before you go and bring it up. Like, if you bring it up in the right way as a concern, like no one in your leadership chain will have any issue with that whatsoever. And so, yeah, I do wish that there was more. I wish I had more resources, but at least at Kanji, I can do that. So
Awesome.
I love that statement. That's awesome. I love the difference too. Great call out on sponsorship and mentorship in terms of looking for someone who's willing to invest in you as opposed to someone who's, you know, merely providing guidance, as valuable as that is. JP Morgan Chase, which I was on their cyber team for a while, of which was 700 people, had a mentorship program that was more formal. And it just seemed that it looked like it was so many people just looking for mentors as opposed to people willing to mentor. And I think that strikes the problem that everyone wants help and not everyone realizes that they can also be helping. And maybe you have a really unique way to help, and maybe you might be new to the field or back to imposter syndrome. I still feel like everyone has a lot of power, right? So if you can help anyone in any way you can. How I think that helped me find mentors and sponsors is that I just had really different, weird, unique hobbies, and I would call them out and try to just give something interesting to that senior management person. And if they casually said that they liked, surfing, for instance, I'd say like, oh, here's an artist I really like who does these cool surfboard designs. And, I like this artist because they do the similar medium work that I do. Like I would find hobbies or things that this other human could connect with that weren't just based on the job, right? Because then you're actually developing a dynamic relationship with this person. This person can think of you just outside of the work that could have heavy biased against. And, you can prove that there's ways that you can be resourceful that could be worth investing in outside of just like the one static thing that they might see you in.
I think that's great because then you really build this connection with them, and that's a great way to then push them forward. So awesome. I kind of want to open up some questions to the audience so I can toss this at everyone. But any questions for the panelists? Sarah.
Hello, ladies. I'm really weird about talking into microphones. It's uncomfortable, but I just wanted to start off by saying, hey, thank you so much for not just being here and existing as like women in the space, but by taking the opportunity to be in the position that you are to open the floor up and acknowledge like, hey, we know we're white ladies here. Like you're occupying that space and giving it the floor to people that are also, in need. And I think that's really awesome. So good for you. I get really nervous when I do these kinds of talks, but as a
You're doing great.
as a previous recruiter, having partnered with like managers previously and working with like people analytics and hearing what you guys are talking about, it's very, I just want to say like I've seen this and I agree with it. And then when you're talking about the logistics for someone who's starting out, which I currently am, I'm still like an outsider to the space. I just wanted to kind of hear like something, I guess I wanted to share my experience and kind of see if you had something that you could echo to be validating to my experience. So something that I did when I was going into my program was I kind of like did a very sales driven tactic where I contacted women who had graduated it and went hunting for a mentor out of those women. And then one of them actually sponsored me for a job that is giving me an interview, right? So like kind of chasing that person down. And the reason I bring that up is because when you stole my question, Patrick, you were like, hey, how do you find a mentor? And I think people get in their heads with that imposter syndrome. They get nervous about like, being that hungry person looking for opportunity. So like in my case, I kind of was literally just messaging strangers over and over. Have you guys had similar experiences where you were chasing just to kind of like validate other people in this room who are like looking for mentors, but maybe applying to those programs isn't realistic because they are so overridden with demand? You know what I mean?
First off, You said that you're outside of the space coming in and you're sitting in the kanji office in the Okta building at Objective by the We.
Yeah.
So you're not. You're in. Congratulations. You're in. You're in. Yeah. Hunting is hard, and I think hunting is frustrating, and that's why I respond with anger when it comes to having to show off who I am, right? Is because if I'm hunting, it means that the people around me aren't valuing me or identifying that space. Granted, it's different when you're starting totally new. But maybe that's your own individual power and unique way that you can go about is hunting, right? And if that's the case, you're in the right space.
I'll just say that at Google, I often send random emails out to like high up people in various organizations because I'm like, hey, like, do you want to just talk about this thing? Like, I really think your job is interesting and I'm curious about learning about what you work on. And most people are so flattered to like have people reaching out to them that are like interested in what they do. And so I think it's like, it's an awesome thing to do and most people are going to be open to it. And if they aren't, then like, that's okay. You can just like let go of those ones. But my guess is you'll get a lot of people who will, yeah, be there to talk with you about stuff. Awesome.
Hi. So I'm a little bit upset but saddened that you guys didn't mention age discrimination within the tech industry. I've experienced it. The average time I've seen people stay at a particular job is 2 to 4 years, and companies don't even invest in the older people because they're either too old to learn or other things like that. And that's just not true. But you mentioned, all of you, the diversity stuff, but you didn't mention age as one of the things. So I wanted to call that out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. There's like so many different ways people are diverse and like yeah, like as Kitty said, like we are all white-ish women and like this like in some ways we are not diverse on this panel right now and yeah, thank you for calling that out. And I think that it's really important to remember that like diversity is really dependent on the context you're in and in some spaces that'll be like really different. And it presents really different problems for different people, and it's all something we should be aware about.
It's really, can the person do the job, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I really think about inclusion as like, I want to build teams and work for companies in a way that like, where the company makes sure that anyone from any background can succeed. And so I think that that's, yeah, it's like a really broad definition.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is something that you feel that we should be calling out?
Aside from the age discrimination, or I'm not sure
No,
what you're
age
saying.
discrimination. So specifically, what is something that we could be taking away that you've experienced?
An example would be some years ago, I was looking for a job at another company. It took me 2 years. My hair was this color. I dyed my hair. I got the next job I applied for.
Wow.
Because when they got the facial, I had the same tech resume,
Yeah.
right, with the certifications and whatnot. But the hair color was triggering the bias, as far as I can tell. It was so quick, such a change.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
That's huge. And you're 100% right. Thank you for calling that out.
Hearing about that reminds me of one of my colleagues, well, past colleague. He said that for like age, for and instead of like also just changing color, is like he said he was retired and was going back just like part-time kind of work or something, and he actually got twice as many compared to when he was just trying to apply as a full-time employee as well. So it just reminded me about that. I wanted to state that.
Thanks, Corey.
Ha, got
Good
it.
hands.
Single-handed. Sort of like on the same vein, and to kind of go back to one of the questions that Patrick had for the panel, which was, like, there's a lot of like unspoken issues that go in the day-to-day, like in the background, like that a lot of these, like, we have to deal with, and it's not really, people don't really realize that we're having to deal with. And sometimes, like most of the time, you will have to advocate for yourself, right? Sometimes if you notice with your coworker, if you have that the mental space to do it, you can actually help them and advocate for them. But a lot of the times we're having to advocate for ourselves, right? I was wondering, like, how would you approach like having to, if I'm sensing like some sort of discrimination or something in like my own management or like in some process, like how can we tactfully approach this?
It's so hard. It's also going to be different depending on what the issue is, right? So I
Yeah.
definitely, again, is who I am here, going to have the same kind of conversation or starting point. I always start it with my direct manager, and I try to treat it as casual and informal as possible, and just say like, "Hey, I noticed this thing. I'm just going to say the word sexism," right? Like, and then like you just, right? I'm just going to say it, and then maybe we can have a conversation around it, and then from there, and again, is this like a passive issue that you're having? Is there someone actively thorn in your siding, like hurting your day to day? Are you even in the room, right? Like, are you even the person that can even get there? And that hard, awkward balance between fighting for yourself or appearing too aggressive, right? It's really difficult. I treat it by documenting absolutely everything that I can, even if I think I'm never going to use it again. So I'm screenshotting constantly, Slack channel words are always, documented. And it's hard. I'm going to step back and make sure that other people see.
It's hard.
It's hard. I do think that like talking about it does help, like even just like with your friends outside of work, like get other people's perspectives on it, and like have your support network that is on your side and there for you, even if like the people at your company aren't. And hopefully there's someone like your manager or someone at the company that you trust that you can go to with that kind of thing.
If I could say,
Yeah.
I you have to have the conversation, even if your manager is someone you don't trust.
Yeah.
You got to have it.
Yeah, although maybe with HR, I don't like, depending on the situation, like if your manager is part of the problem, like go around your manager, probably.
You always say start with your manager.
They do. Okay.
It's awful. As someone who has gone through this experience.
That sucks.
It's awful.
That sucks. Yeah.
Careful. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that also brings like another good point, which is like, talking to other people who might be also in the same situation, like sort of helps you validate that like you're not overreacting to like something, and this is not like your brain making stuff up. Like this is actually something that might turn into a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also like, I would say very, very, very rarely your brain making stuff up. Like usually if you feel weird, like there's probably something weird.
Yeah, like just this past week, my friend came to visit. She was like, one of my coworkers like hugged me and smelled my hair, like, and kissed my head. I was like, but he's foreign, so is that okay? I was like, they don't cover that in training. I don't know what to say to that one. But yeah, she generally like gave it more distance and is kind of like reevaluating. But yeah, you have to tell someone that you trust to kind of like bounce the idea off of, because so many things like that example, I don't even know. Like, is that an issue? Like, yeah,
Felt uncomfortable is an issue.
it is, right? Yeah. So
I might be overkilling with this question, but I will say, to the humans in the room, like we're having a conversation about what we need to do. Everyone who feels like this isn't applicable to them, you have a takeaway action here, right? If you see something that's weird, if you think something's going on, you also have the individual power to ask those humans, like, are you okay? What's going on? That is a form of documentation, if it is in Slack, for that other person to speak to. You are giving a vent for that person. This is not our own struggle or our struggle, right? Like you are a witness or could be a witness to something that's going on. So this conversation is applicable to everyone in this room, even though it might not feel like it, right?
Good call out.
I got
Thank
one
you.
other thing, but go ahead,
Just
sorry.
a small note on that. It's like also if it's in the moment, it's really helpful to actually just say something in the moment. If you like witness something that just like feels weird, someone made a weird comment and you're just like, hey, like I don't think that sounded how you meant it to sound. Usually the person will like apologize immediately and be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And it makes the place feel safer because people know that you're like standing up for each other.
So my white hair, I have a lot of experience. So one of the other things I think you should talk about a little bit that hasn't been brought up, but I've talked to some other people in the room and they're experiencing it too, is the number of pivots that you go through in your career, right? I've had like 6 pivots over my career. And some of the people here as the students are pivoting from what perhaps they went to school for into another field, information security in some flavor. And just set up that potentially it's going to happen for these folks and they shouldn't feel worried about it. They should embrace it. It's a expected change, I think, as technology moves so quickly.
Yeah. Totally agree. I don't know if you comments.
Hi, okay. So I'm currently an undergraduate student right now, and there's a lot of competition in the tech world, as we all know, not just women, but, everybody. And I noticed I went to community college before I attended university, and I noticed kind of this unspoken competition between girls in, my computer science classes, especially. The, 20, 25 kids in the classroom, and 3 are girls, and we're all sitting at separate sides of the room, and we all find our little group, but none of us are in the same group. And I also noticed that when I was going into internships or I was looking at jobs, it was a lot harder for me to connect with even women managers that I was working with. I don't know why. And I would sometimes talk to my friends about it, but I don't have a lot of friends that are in the same space as me, so I couldn't really just go up and ask these other people in my, class or this, do you feel like you're in competition with me, or do you feel like this way? And so I kind of wanted to ask you if this is something that you experience. Have you in college or now or, continuing to this day? And how do you create an environment where you feel like you can support one another or at least try and support someone next to you instead of it feel like a constant competition between you two?
I call it the unicorn complex. This idea that because at present point, female identifying humans are a minority in the tech space, in the cybersecurity space. A general trend outside of that is this idea that I guess maybe it's pick me girl, but I don't know if I really even understand what pick me girl is, but the terms of you are unique and this is what makes you special. And the acknowledgement that other people around you could also be like that. People feel like they're losing their special uniqueness because of it. I grew up feeling that very strongly. That was a hard thing for me to acknowledge and unlearn. And I definitely think it's there. With growth in numbers is great, but that doesn't help an individual, right? It doesn't even help the 2 other, women in your class, right? The best thing that I've done is just happiness, open smile, optimism, kindness, right? As face for as you can. And no one ever wants to hear that as an answer, right? But finding those communities that do exist online, we're here for you, right? But yeah, I mean, I feel it resonates with me so much, but I do call it the unicorn complex because I've seen it so much in the environment.
Yeah, I think there's some level of intimidation too. I feel like they're intimidated by you. And the more each of you are in different corners, the more the imitation like that grows because you don't know each other in a very personal way. So breaking that down, like you said, helps.
Yeah. I think saying the unsaid things can be quite powerful and kind of it can sometimes kind of like shock people out of that dynamic where if you're like, hey, like, well, like I feel this weird feeling between us that makes me feel like I'm intimidated by you or something, but I actually just want to be friends. And sometimes people are like, oh yeah, weird, like that is there, like let's actually just be friends. And it sounds, I don't know, it feels like a little bit like kindergarten, like you go up to someone and you're like, hey, you want to be my friend? But kind of it works sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't, but that's also a good data point to have about someone. So I don't know, just like what you said with I remember you had said something in your comment about like thinking about going up to them and saying it, like I don't, it could be an interesting experiment at least to try that and see what happens.
I have one other kind of question if we have time. So these opportunities, like where we are right now, I feel like are so important, not just for students or people who are going into, new industries, but for everybody. Because I know a lot of people here are already working in the tech space, or there's people that are pivoting, or there's people that, are in college like me right now. And this is kind of just like general question or comment, but this is super important, and a lot of people seek opportunities like this. And I know, being at Berkeley, there's people that are, hungry for stuff like this, and they don't get to find it that much. And there's even though, there's big universities that say, okay, we're prepping you for mentorships, internships, stuff like that, they really, don't, because it's something that you have to go seek out yourself. I started kind of a panel event at my community college where I would, take people in the industry and I'd bring them to school, and then I'd have people come, and sometimes like 5 people would come or whatever. But it was a really great way for me to meet people that were in the industry, people that I could ask for mentorship. A lot of guys came instead of girls, but, I'm working on that now. How this is something that I would want to, try and get more people to come to, especially girls, like, because I'm sure a lot of people from the universities would, want to attend. I don't know how many people you want to come, but how would you go about like more outreach for this,
I feel like that might be a Patrick answer.
Wow, no, this is a good question, because this is also something, we as organizing conferences and events often struggle with to some extent, where we're like, this is the best thing ever, and then like get not a lot of feedback or people involved. And so what's worked best for us or work well with us is finding, again, kind of supporters. So like, for example, for this event, Kanji was super helpful. It also, for example, we'll talk to Megan, who has great connections here. So trying to like leverage other people, and usually, and you kind of touch this, people are generally really excited to help out, especially if you're asking for help. And if they're not excited, well, probably not the right person to reach out for, because I think there's a lot of humans who want to support what you're doing, and like once they hear about it, they're like, awesome, how can I help? And so I think it depends on what exactly you're trying to do, but I've really found, trying to connect with people, a sponsor, I think the term was used, I think is a really great idea. Someone who will like hype you up and has great connections and leverages is what we found that works really well. And then the great thing is, as you start building some rapport, what we always try to do is, okay, how can we then use our reach to kind of feed back and support people who are maybe a few steps back because they were newer to what we were doing 5 years ago. So it's kind of like the play it, pay it forward kind of thing seems to work good. Feedback. I do have one last question then. So this segues greatly into the last question. I want to open this to you and then also the audience. So, at the Objective We initiative, we are, cognizant of the challenges in the tech space, and, we have ideas for panels and conferences and students. I think some of those are awesome, but what I want to ask are, what else could we be doing, or other organizations like us, to make sure that, it's not just talking the talk? What are actionable things we can do? If there's areas we're missing, because it's, we all have our biases and our blind spots. So I'd love just to hear any feedback or ideas from you or from the audience as well. Like, what can we improve? What are good ideas? Those kind of things.
This is a good idea. Do more of this.
Maybe you could do a kanji of RSA once a year or something, and awesome. Yeah.
Actually, I have something for this, because then I tried to do this earlier, but because of my thing about talking in microphones, my voice was shaking. So I'm much better at not talking to the microphone.
Great.
All right, so the thing that is my idea is that I'm overcoming imposter syndrome, right? What would be something to help you overcome that? In your cases, it was anchor people and mentors. That's what I heard as a listener. No, absolutely not. Okay,
Tried.
so taking that information as someone who's like starting out and like building that confidence for myself, what I think would be helpful to people who are coming after me, because I kind of feel like sharing your experience and like having a platform to do that, right? Like you guys are in it, you're on that side, that's awesome. Maybe in your Discord channel, just having like a channel for people not to like commiserate. I'm not talking about like, hey, I'm gonna post something and like get a response, but do you guys remember, I'm gonna age myself. There was that guy who did like post secrets for that was like a big trending book, right? Like, what if we had like an anonymous, like, hey, like I was cutting into the industry and this is like how I totally embarrassed myself to get it, like to get to that point, right? Like, wouldn't that be some way to overcome that, where it's like validating your
Shared
insecurity?
experiences.
Yeah. But like a success story
Sure.
platform.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I like that. Or highlighting that as a way to also inspire people who are probably going through something similar.
Yeah, like a messy kind of forum for it.
Sure.
Not
Nothing
like
too
the
formal.
polished one where it's like, wow, I just did
The Instagram
everything
version.
right. You know what I mean?
No, I love
Like I
that.
kind of want it to be sloppy.
Real.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it has to be like mistakes are made.
Yeah.
It has to be like I put my foot in my mouth and this was a challenge and this is how I overcame it. Kind of like what you're talking about. You're dealing with VCs and you're like, I don't really have answers for you, but like I do have persistence, like and data points.
You don't have to throw it back here. I might have like maybe a suggestion. You could totally shoot me down if it's really bad, but how we're all kind of like looking for job opportunities. Maybe like there could be something like kind of like that old thing in the past, like bring your kid to work day, except bring your mentee or sponsor to work day, kind of like an intern for a day kind of thing. Maybe that could be something, because especially me, I've come from like working as a paraprofessional, and then I finally worked my way just by bothering the hell out of so many professionals on LinkedIn. No, Patrick and Mandy, you're a victim of that. But I was fortunate enough to get a hold of a mentor who's done like 20 years in the cyberspace, and he gave me a chance. He let me in his program for free just because of the hunger. But unfortunately, he couldn't provide like any kind of like work day kind of thing. So maybe that could be something. I also used to be a recruiter too, and I always felt bad for like candidates who couldn't have an opportunity or couldn't work. So maybe that could be maybe a solution to like the problems going on now. So many like job layoffs, and especially in IT space. So
No, I love it. We'll call it Objective Steve, because jobs.
Objective with the Steve.
But no, I think that's a great idea, puns aside, because like you said, there's a lot of individuals super talented breaking in, and so like making the connections, because the companies I know are hungry for talent as well, and so kind of making the right connections, and it's something I think we should really focus on.
Yeah, I just feel like we're kind of like in that, like almost kind of like how Ghidra's symbol is like a dragon eating its tail, and we're like just gonna keep going down the same problems over and again until like both employers and employees, like employers sometimes they don't want to spend that money, and I understand, especially if someone doesn't have all that knowledge, but maybe that could be like a way to bring it. I'd be love to help.
Yeah, we should chat more.
Yeah.
And just to kind of add on to that, like I think that this could be a good idea, especially for like people who are new to the field, because one of the questions I work in academia, so I have a lot of contact with students.
Awesome.
And one of the biggest questions that I get is like, okay, like I'm interested in this part of cyber, but I have no idea what the job looks like on a day-to-day basis. Right. So like we try to like put them in contact with, professionals in the industry and government and like all different sectors to try to provide a little bit more insight into that, but it's not the same as like, seeing what that actually looks like.
Gotcha.
So that I think I support that idea.
Oh, use the mics. Sorry. Yeah, it's recorded. So.
Hi again. So, Wow, I just really lost my train of thought. Give me one. No, give me 1 second. So, in no way am I saying, pyramid schemes are good. But 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 they do have a good business model, and kind of how just how I see it is that you yourself are doing a lot of the putting on the events by yourself and with the help, but you're spearheading them. And there's a lot of like the founders complex where you want to make sure that everything goes right, and you're doing that. But I think what could be really beneficial in getting more people in is kind of having maybe not people that work with you, but outreach people. So especially students, I think would be really, really great to have on your team. Kind of is okay, well, you're our outreach student at Berkeley or Davis or UCLA, places that you like to have events at. And those people can specifically go into classes, go talk to their friends and say, this is something that's happening. This is how I've benefited from it. Because when I was doing my panel event, kind of the only way that I could see people would come was I went to them. And so I went into classrooms and I said, this is what I'm doing. You should come if you want an edge on, competition, or you want this. And I was, there's free food. I was like, there's free food, come. Like, I got Chick-fil-A. And so and then people ended up coming that way. And so I just went to each classroom on my own. I talked to people. I said, come to this. I had handed out flyers and stuff like that. And I think that could be really good to just have people bringing in other people, especially at places, right? And I think also giving companies that you work with, as people that like the employees and employers, you say, okay, it's great collaborative process because not only can you hear from consumers and people that might be using your product, but you could also talk to people that are coming into this space and you could recruit. And so it's a lot, like, we're getting bright minds, we're getting people from who are going to great universities or self-teaching, people who you might not think to hire at first. We have those people here, and this is why you should be working with us now, and then people that way would be like, okay, wow, I could recruit great people at these events, sponsor it, and then people would come. And so it's kind of like a all,
Yeah,
together
win-win.
thing.
No, and I actually love that because that's exactly one of the things we struggled with, where we're like, hey, we have what we think is an awesome event. There's free food, free training, amazing talks. And it's like, how do we get more students? Like, I don't know anyone at Berkeley, but I feel like if I had someone, they could talk to the cybersecurity program and be like, hey, this is a super cool event. And then, it'd be inundated with amazing students. But like, so I think that would be an example where that would be super beneficial. So
I can do it.
Boom, there's one.
It needs to be more than just a single event. It needs to be a path forward, I think,
True.
for the people, so they can see step by step how to get from here to there.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's a little disjoint. I would agree.
But it's just, I would assume all of you don't know where to look for some of the resources you get to, and having paths or even multiple paths laid out. Hey, there's this resource here, there's this other thing here, would help people transition into the field.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey.
Rabbit holes in like YouTube.
Have different qualities.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you mentioned something earlier about like an interview prep course that was at Stanford. I just wanted to call out that Google is great, and if you are if you identify with a underrepresented group, and you do apply to Google, talk to your recruiter. There are interview prep programs that are available, and they will help you through that whole process. And if you're not to the point that you have a mentor, or you can't get that interview prep, they recently launched a I forget the name of it, but it is basically you can go through the Google interview online with AI. which gives you tons of practice and experience and things like that. Because, you know, I want tech to be more diverse, and I just want to make sure that those resources are available to people.
Thank
That's
you.
all.
Well, I personally just want to thank all our panelists, Katie, Laura, Megan. Really, really appreciate you coming up and sharing and giving an amazing insight. I know that's not always the easiest thing to do, so thank you so much. Also, thank you all the audience for being here, open to what is being said, providing feedback. You know, we're all in this together, so it's amazing. So round of applause for the panelists and you all, and then lunch.